the conversation that I want to have, and where I think you are uniquely, suited to speak to, is the broader conversation about the crisis of consciousness that we're experiencing right now. A situation in which, materialism and consumerism drive priorities. It's all buttressed by this government industrial complex that's propped up by corporate interests that places accumulation and comfort above community and conservation, all at the cost of our well-being, of course. And it's all being denigrated by social media and these algorithms that foment division and hate, ultimately, dividing us from each other and from ourselves, and distancing ourselves from the shared fabric that kind of unites us and creates the cohesion that's required to function as a healthy society.
I think that there are 2 points of demarcation that are worth noting. One, the advent of the Industrial Revolution, and second, the advent of trickle-down economics. It was in the late 1800s that the Industrial Revolution exploded onto the scene in England, then in the United States. And there were quite a few artists and philosophers, writers, thinkers, both in Europe and in the United States, who tried to sound an alarm, a warning, that we were becoming, as a civilization, so mesmerized by externalities that we were losing the balance between the outer and the inner self. We were losing the balance with internal issues that were just as important as what we could see with our physical eyes. When I was in college, I had these huge posters on my wall. Like, remember we used to have from an art museum, art posters, right? And I had these huge angels, and I didn't know, and it said, Burne Jones, but I didn't know who Burne Jones was. I just knew I loved these huge pictures of angels. Many years later, I was walking down Fifth Avenue, New York City, passing the Metropolitan Museum. And, they have these big flags. This is what our exhibit is today. And there were these huge angels by, Edward Burne Jones. So I was so excited I was going to see them. And I took one of those, you have a little machine, a little earphone, they tell you things.
Right.
And I had already started writing my book, Healing the Soul of America, and I knew about the Transcendentalists, and I knew about the Industrial Revolution and all of this. And I had no idea that his paintings were part of this. And this is what Burne Jones said: every time they build a machine, I will paint an angel.
You should be painting a lot of angels.
Yeah, you had to paint a lot.
Yeah.
So this was, the beginning of this horrifying split within human consciousness. And then by the 20th century, it climaxed with the Industrial Revolution, and this idea that we would solve all of humanity's problems through this mechanistic paradigm, the Newtonian idea that the world is just a machine, and if you want to fix it, you just tweak the machine. Well, obviously, that has turned out to not be true, but the damage has been done in terms of so much of particularly the Western mind being drawn so far into the material world that it has almost withered our spiritual musculature. Nothing is more of an example of this than what happened in 1980. Now, I'm not romanticizing American capitalism before 1980. I'm not romanticizing or whitewashing the behavior of corporate interests in this country before 1980. But I can tell you, I'm old enough to be able to tell you that there was a time in my lifetime, not that we were perfect, not that our democracy was perfect, not that corporate ethics were so exemplary, but the social consensus was we were supposed to try. Mm-hmm. With the advent of trickle-down economics, this propaganda, this horrifying canard was like wool pulled over the eyes of the American people, where if we just increase the stockholder value, if we just increase the profits, the short-term profits of your stockholders, even if at the expense of the other stakeholders, at the expense of workers, at the expense of the community, at the expense of the environment, this will be good, see? Because it'll lift all boats. Those people, those new corporate aristocrats will just create so many jobs that money will just trickle down, lift all boats. Well, obviously, after 40 years, we can see it did not lift all boats. It left millions and millions of people without even a life vest. You know, in the 1970s, I think a lot of people don't realize, in the 1970s, the average American worker had a decent job with decent benefits, could afford a car, could afford a home, could afford a yearly vacation, and could afford to send their kids to college. This is aberrational. This massive transfer of wealth that began with Ronald Reagan, it began with the Republicans, but no Democratic president has stopped it. And we're now at a point where, as I said earlier, the status quo will not disrupt itself. It's no different than, you know, it's interesting, Rich, because you and I are you know, coming from the sort of wellness community, et cetera. There's very sophisticated thinking within that community regarding drugs and alcohol. And it's very sophisticated because people have known so many people who died. And we know that if it goes too far, you know, most of us have had this situation in our lives. Either we've made the call or had someone else make the call to us. You think we ought to do something? Mm-hmm. Because if we don't intervene, this person could die. We need to stop our magical thinking about democracy and about the survival of the human race. You continue like this, you could die. We will lose our democracy. So at this point, we need to stage an intervention. And as John F. Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And that, to me, is the point where we are.
Yeah, we can identify, or we can place all our focus on Donald Trump and label him as a malignant narcissist and the like. But ultimately, he's a symbol. He's a reflection of, you know, decades of tectonic economic shifts that have led to a situation where people who have been so deprived and unheard for so long and have to work 3 jobs as opposed to the one job that provides the car and the picket fence and all of that. Of course, you're going to have anger and, you know, resentment and, you know, all of the kind of emotions that we're seeing flaring up. It's reflective of that. And it's either going to lead towards some kind of revolutionary act and the dissolution, you know, of the union. Ultimately, there has to be a reckoning, right? The most healthy way to address it is to have some form of intervention where we can course correct what has gone wrong and find a way to provide for those people in a meaningful way who have been so deprived for too long.
If you look at history, it's very interesting to learn, to see not only what conditions provided the opportunity for Hitler to gain power, but also how the United States and the other allies responded to that problem at the end of the war. At the end of World War I, the attitude towards Germany on the part of the allies was basically reparations in the form of Deutschmark till we tell you to stop. Interestingly enough, it was the American president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, who tried to warn them that this was a bad idea. He was not listened to, and the desperation of the German people at that time became a petri dish. When you have large groups of desperate people, it becomes a national security risk. It is whether it's in a corner of the U.S. city or a corner of the world, because large groups of desperate people become a petri dish out of which a certain level of societal dysfunction is almost inevitable. Ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces becomes pretty easy. That's why the Marshall Plan, that's why we treated Germany so well after World War II. That's why we treated the Japanese so well after World War II. We knew that when people have been defeated, don't keep kicking them. Something terrible is going to happen. Even if you don't see it from a moral perspective, just see it from a political perspective. So you're absolutely right. For 40 years, people have been kicked down. Vote for us and it'll be better. Vote for us and it'll be better. And at a certain point, one man who I don't think any of us thought could have done that much damage so quickly, who was willing to take advantage of all the anger to harness that for his own political purposes, then that coupled with what you've mentioned, the power of social media, and we've gotten not only the problem we have on our hands of a genuinely neo-fascist force field, but what should have been seen as a predictable one. And if, I believe, if the Democratic Party had been truly holding to its principles over the last 40 years, well, listen, if either political party had held to their principles over the last 40 years, it wouldn't we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah, and it feels like the Democratic Party can't get out of its own way. It's very feckless in terms of how it's dealing with this, with bullet points and policy initiatives that fail to kind of penetrate the emotional force field of the people who could benefit from those policy shifts the most, right? Like there needs to be a broader conversation where these people are actually feeling heard.
Well, these people were told, vote for us, stand in line for 7 and 8 hours, give us the White House, give us the Senate, give us the House, and we're going to make your life better. What happened to the conversation of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour? What happened to the conversation about canceling the college loan debt? What happened to the conversation about Medicare for all? They are peripheralized like it's a bunch of errant children who don't know what they're talking about, too far left, even though the issues that are considered, such as I just mentioned, that are considered so far left in America today, are considered like moderate, centrist views in every advanced democracy except for ours, certainly in Europe. And so to say to people, it's not just I don't even think it's just the emotional force field. It is their pocketbook. And now the Democrats wringing their hands, how are we going to win in 2022? I'll tell you what you do. You raise the minimum wage, then people will vote for you. You cancel those college loan debts, people will vote for you. You pass Medicare for all, people will vote for you. It's really not rocket science, and it's not just messaging. It's not just messaging. It's who they are willing to serve at the end of the day.
And why can't they just get that done?
Because they, at the end of the day, are under the thrall of the same corporate donors, whether it has to do with the military-industrial complex, whether it has to do with big pharmaceutical companies, fossil fuel companies, big agricultural companies, big chemical companies, not the NRA, but on that one, they are better, but they're still not getting it done. So let's not, we all need to awaken. It's like a woman who, her friends just have to say, honey, he's a bad guy. He's not who you think he is. Yeah. At this point, these people are not doing it because they do not choose to.
Yeah. It was